Every company has a data platform. It's just a question of whether you acknowledge it or not, and then staff it and build technology around it appropriately. Because what you described, someone ingesting data from something and putting it into a Google Sheet and exporting it somewhere else, that is someone working within like an informal data platform where there's some critical business process and they like need to flow data from one system of record to another to make like the system work.
I'm thrilled today to have our guest, Nick Schrock, on the show. Nick joins us as founder and CTO at Dagster. Nick, do you want to introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about what you do at Dagster and what Dagster does more generally?
Yeah, so as you said, thanks for having me on the show. Honored to be here. Nick Schrock, as you said, the CTO and founder of Dagster Labs, the company behind Dagster, which is an open source project in a technology in data orchestration, which is broadly responsible for, you effectively think of it like a framework for data engineers and ML engineers to build data pipelines and do so in Python. And it's specifically orchestration, which means it's responsible for scheduling and ordering compute in production. And that's a fancy way of saying like I invoke this job and then that job in order to orchestrate an entire database workflow. And then we call ourselves a data orchestrator, meaning we're very tailored for the data platform use case. So the technology comes with out of the box asset lineage, data observability, data quality, and kind of features which are very important to data and platform engineers.
Yeah, so Dagster is a technical product that is primarily used by data engineering teams to really make sure from a marketing context or a business stakeholder context that data is properly transformed. Has the right observability characteristics to make sure that you can make sure that everything is running properly and that if null values are present and are resulting in a whole bunch of incorrect summations and aggregates, that gets flagged and alerted, and all the workflow that comes around large scale data processing, which as someone who in a previous life has worked on these systems, very hands on, can be extremely painful.
Yeah, totally.
Great. So today we are going to talk about a subject that Nick knows extremely well, sitting on the other side of the house. We've done a lot on the show in the past around bringing marketers on and talking about their relationships with data teams, and how to drive effective relationships within this. Nick is going to talk about this problem from the other side of the house, and really asking the basic question around, what are you working effectively with your data team? And if not, then what does great look like, and what are the steps that you need to take on both sides? Whether you are a junior email marketer or a CMO, to effectively build the right relationship, set the right processes in place, and really make sure that the cross-functional collaboration between your team as the core business stakeholder and the data team is as effective as possible. Nick, I know you're sort of very passionate about sort of where the categories come from and where things are going. Maybe you can sort of talk about this problem from a bit of a historical context and what you've seen in the last 5 years or so.
So the problem, I'll call it the problem being defined as like managing analytics and data platforms at companies. It's a pretty interesting lineage, I think. Not to overuse the term, historically, analytics was kind of almost like a blue collar engineering where like you would have like these kind of off to the side systems with like so-called lower skilled folks who would like work in tools like Informatica and use drag and drop to like ETL things over. And that might have worked with simpler applications and less demanding time and freshness requirements. But the world has gotten more complicated and demanding, and the data platforms had to evolve along with it. And I think a lot of the progress that has been made in the last 15 years is actually kind of what I'll call the software engineeringification of the data ecosystem. This is kind of like goes back to the story of like how I even got involved in this. My background is I worked at Facebook in 2009, 2017. And while I was there, I was best known for being one of the co-creators of a technology called GraphQL, which was much more in the application stack. And I moved on from Facebook looking at what to do next, and I kept on running into data ML engineering. It's kind of like companies would tell me all the time, it's like, this is the biggest liability we're facing. right? And I would say something like, I'm talking to a healthcare company, and I would say like you're telling me that what you think is preventing you from moving forward in your business is the inability to do regularized computation on a CSV file. And they're like, yeah, pretty much. And I'm like, okay, maybe this is something worth looking into. And the data engineering space, I like to call it the biggest mismatch between the complexity and criticality of a domain and the tools and processes to support that domain that I've ever seen in my entire career. The only thing that came close was like web development in like circa 2010. And if you look in that ecosystem, right, it's like a world transformed now in terms of like the evolution of both the tools and the profession. And you can see this sort of transformation working in real time now, meaning that like data engineering is taken way more seriously. There's analytics engineers who are effectively kind of like upskilled, to use the term, analysts who are now working in tools like dbt and really participating in the data platform in a first class way. And a lot of like the advancements here have been adopting software engineering best practices and applying them to data. And I think we're really at the beginning of that process and that revolution. And there's a ton of work to do. I think like anyone who's living the reality of data platforms at companies fully understands that we are not in anywhere close to an optimal configuration where like things feel efficient, things feel like they're compounding, where like it gets better all the time. You can apply engineers to it, and it gets better and better. It used to be said that the big challenge in data was so-called big data, right? That was like the term 10 years ago. And you notice no one says that anymore, right? It's gone from the zeitgeist. And the reason why is that big data is solved. You can take a team, right? Or you can like it used to be the data was too big to even process. So you'd have to like hire a team and use Hadoop and some crazy technologies in order to get it done. Now in today's world, you can take off-the-shelf technologies like Snowflake, Databricks. You can have a team and like you can handle data of infinite size. And now the problem is that what I call big complexity. There's too many moving pieces. There's kind of like big metadata, I've heard people call it. But to me, it's like it is big complexity. That was a huge problem facing the entire industry. And like data platforms have never been more critical to the main line of business. Analytics have never been more important. ML has never been more important. It's all driven by the data platform. It has to be real time or real time ish. And it has multiple stakeholders, multiple technologies. It's insanely complex. And so we're just at the beginning of that journey. That was quite the roundabout journey, but there's a lot there.
That's great. I have a funny anecdote to tell around the early days of Simon Data. We had an early customer, that had these workflows, that were on the marketing side of the house, but were exactly as you described. In that they, involved logging into an admin, pulling a CSV, injecting it into a fourth, sheet in an Excel file, doing a whole bunch of unholy manipulations, and then going to the last tab of the sheet, exporting out a column of data and then, uploading into a system. I remember, our early customer saying, look, if you all can plug into our data infrastructure in a way that can automate this whole process, then we'll have a successful partnership. What's funny is I think a lot of the problems that business users see, it's one of taking a lot of their hyper manual processes that probably don't look all too different than that, and having them automated and pushed down into a lot of their core data infrastructure, at least for a large class of business problems that Snowflake or Databricks workloads now live on. But what's funny is what you're saying is that the complexity around those computations doesn't go away, because now lives in other systems. And the processes that existed a decade ago are certainly better than pulling a CSV from a website and then putting it into a fourth tab of an Excel file. But they're still somewhat archaic. If you look at how modern software systems and web applications are built.
Totally. And just to be clear, like Snowflake and Databricks do not help you solve the problem that you just described at all, right? Like the problem that you described is not like big data, right? That is like big complexity. Exactly. We're saying the same thing, I think.
Yes, the data
And
lives there, and the computation lives there, but the process of moving the data around, they don't solve.
yeah, this is another thing I like the way I like to frame this is that, which speaks to the story you just told, is that every company has a data platform. It's just a question of whether you acknowledge it or not, and then staff it and build technology around it appropriately. Because what you described, someone ingesting data from something and putting it into a Google sheet and exporting it somewhere else, that is someone working within like an informal data platform where there's some critical business process and they like need to flow data from one system of record to another to make like the system work. I think we're going to get into this, but like I'm very passionate that like teams need to acknowledge the fact that they have a data platform and like staff and plan for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's the same with any strategy. The lack of a strategy, relates to doing something which can back into something that probably makes no sense, but you are effectively moving in some direction.
Yeah.
Let's hone in now, around taking what you went through as sort of a baseline, and then talking about how this relates into business applications. And for listeners today, I'm sure folks see bad data. I'm sure they see late data. I'm sure they see integrations that break for unknown reasons. How does solving the problem that you've described drive better continuity, better operability, better workflows, better data access, in downstream, data applications?
So that's a big question, but I think there's kind of three like fundamental like things that we talk about frequently. One is that we view ourselves as a productivity tool, meaning that we make it so that data engineers and the stakeholders they support can build their pipelines more quickly, more efficiently, and control the complexity of them. So we really design our systems so that the data pipelines that are built are very testable. We have this declarative programming model that we call software-defined assets, which we feel very passionate about. And the objective of those is to make it so that developers are more productive. And productivity is a very powerful thing in software because one, it means that you can do the existing things you can do faster. But I think more importantly, productivity means that you're controlling the complexity of the software more, and therefore it kind of frees your mind to work on more stuff, so to speak. Like once an engineer is working with a framework that makes sense in their head, they not only do their existing job more efficiently, but they can kind of like, reach for the proverbial stars, as it were, and really move forward. And we see that in our like user base all the time. We're like, not only are they like more efficient, but they're able to kind of like view themselves more of a platform engineer, start to think about enabling their stakeholders. And that is a super powerful dynamic. So that's one aspect, this productivity aspect. Another critical aspect is just like the generalized notion of context. When you adopt Dagster, the objective is to give both the operators, the engineers, and the stakeholders unprecedented context about their data platforms. They can understand what the status of the data is, where it's coming from, when it's going to be refreshed next, and et cetera. And so like context is the foundation of all trust. And in the end, like we want to empower data engineers and ML engineers to build trusted data assets. And that is a foundation of that. And then lastly, kind of the last dimension of value here is sort of consolidation. We kind of bundle a bunch of capabilities into the tool, so you don't need to adopt like 10 tools to kind of assemble a basic data platform. We view ourselves as not just an orchestrator, but a control plane for all your data pipelines and assets. And so that's really where we kind of like position ourselves as. Typically it's kind of the productivity that hooks the engineers because they really get it. There's a fast developer workflow and whatnot. And then as you adopt the technology, those other dimensions of value become very self-evident very quickly.
Got it. Yeah. And of course, putting the right foundation around your data infrastructure and data quality in place, just enables those business applications, pretty clearly. So maybe we can spend a few minutes, talking about some general principles you're really required, for marketers and business stakeholders, to align with your data teams on. And I know we spoke the other day, Nick, you were pretty passionate about, quality is everything, garbage in, garbage out. maybe you can talk about that, and any specific examples around things you see in the market around folks just running things and then they're completely broken, and and how to really just develop a sharper eye for it, cultural resets, the right processes, to make sure that data quality actually is acceptable for the end application.
Yeah, so I think it's very important, especially once you're at any sort of scale, to embed data practitioners with the business units directly. Because I don't believe in kind of like completely self serve analytics and data by non technical users. I think you need to involve people in the software engineering process. Otherwise, like the changes in a centralized platform or an upstream dependencies will constantly be thrashing you. You need to combine that. You can't just have a completely Lord of the Flies situation where data practitioners are splattered all over the org too. So it's also very important to have a centralized data platform team that whose job in life is to kind of be a leverage service org that enables all the practitioners embedded with the business units to own their processes end to end. And so that's kind of like, I think, the idealized state that people should be gunning towards, so to speak. But doing that requires some level of both technological and organizational sophistication in order to pull that off. And there's not even complete alignment, I think, in the industry about like what is the exact right way to do that. So I think we're all kind of figuring it out. So that's kind of the first thought that comes to mind there.
I think it's an observation that I definitely think is the way to go. I'll say it's a bit of a contentious perspective, but it's also a very telling perspective for someone who worked at what's ostensibly one of the three smartest data organizations in the world, in Facebook, and theoretically, if anyone has their data in order, it should be a business with that kind of resourcing, associated with a business where data obviously is front and center of everything they do. And with this model, just acknowledging that if you're running a marketing team and you want to make sure that your non-data expert marketers want to know what's going on, they need, in your perspective, embedded data resources who are deeply connected with the data platform team and understand what data is what, the gotchas, the issues, the anomalies that affect data quality, and this utopian vision of building perfect data with the self-serve catalog, and hiring people on the other side who just interface very cleanly, certainly isn't here today.
Yeah, and this isn't just happening at Facebook, either. I totally like I cut my teeth at Facebook engineering, so I'm very biased towards the approaches there, which I think biased more toward like centralized service teams that had enormous leverage. That was kind of the way we operated. But I see it in slightly different forms in our out in industry. So I think like Ramp does a really good job of this, where they kind of divide their org into squads, and they have like in a given squad, I don't know if they use the word squad, but like a pod or a squad or something. And they have like front end people in that. They have a product person, they have a back end person, they also have a data person, right? Like individual practitioners embedded with the product teams who could like iterate with those teams super quickly. That's not in the marketing org like you're talking about, but like I think it's an example of like, instead of having a centralized data org where you have to centralize requests and whatnot, you instead empower the product teams, and they're forced to actually think about their analytics as part of the product development process rather than like this like after the fact thing, which also makes a lot of sense. And they can iterate super quickly with those teams. And I think the same thing should apply to other downstream functional units at the company. Yeah.
Yep, cool. And I guess when we sort of think about this deployment model that you're suggesting, I kicked off the question around quality, but there are a couple other considerations as well, around just managing dependencies when data changes or data breaks or data gets migrated, and then also just taking a step back from there and thinking about general process consideration, and making sure the two sides are aligned. I know you had some sharp perspective on both of those.
Oh, I have sharp perspectives on a lot of stuff. But yeah, I think this is really an emerging thing in the data world where in the last year, in kind of the more data engineering space, you've heard a lot about, like, people are talking about data contracts. People are talking a lot about the data mesh. At Coalesce Week, we heard a lot about the DBT mesh and all of this about what you're talking about, which is solving these organizational constraints. Yet that, but solving what is a problem you can explain to anyone, which is how can someone make a change confidently and know they won't break anything? And that simple proposition, I would contend, is still an unsolved problem in data. We're just in the earliest stages of doing that. And it's a question of, like, how do you solve it? Is it through kind of setting very strict boundaries between organizations and having fairly heavyweight data contracting, where you have to kind of like do change management? It's like, okay, I want to like query from this column upstream. Well, in order to do that, I need to go to this other code base and like change it so that column exists over there. And if I do that in the wrong order, like the system will tell me when that's going to break. Or do you try to make that more fluid and make it so that those teams can actually cross org boundaries to make like code changes? And that's kind of an organizational question. So yeah, like, probably not a satisfactory answer, but the data world is early on this journey to figure out the best way to structure data platforms so that teams don't break each other. We really believe in both data quality testing, which you can use to kind of implement data contracts, in combination with heavy use of automated testing and CI/CD processes to catch errors up front as frequently as possible. But that sounds great in theory, and often kind of hits some difficult problems when it comes to execution because of a variety of reasons.
Yep. Data quality is a hard problem.
It is. Well, that's
great.
why we believe in building it first class into the tools that the data engineers use directly, right?
Yep.
We think that data quality testing, like, if the job of a data engineer is to produce high quality, up to date data, right? The orchestrator thinks about scheduling a lot. That's the up to date part. But then very few orchestrators, not really any, really think about the high quality bit. And we think that data quality should be a first class citizen in the data engineering process. It is the job, So it shouldn't be like something that's thought of after the fact. It's like a critical component to like thinking about, like, hey, I'm publishing this asset used by downstream stakeholders. Here are the data quality tests that I pledge I will run when I'm executed. And you can, within tools, like, see what's going on there and what has passed and what's failed.
Yep, I can get behind that. So Nick, we're getting to the bottom of the show here. Bonus question for you: if you were to have this conversation again about data orchestration and data quality as it relates to powering business applications and collaborating with marketing and business teams, who would you want to have this conversation with, and why?
I would have it with a couple of our power users actually in our community. Us vendors like to come up on podcasts and kind of pontificate about all this stuff, and also talk our own book and our own product, because that's our job in life. But I really enjoy talking to our users about this, in particular, this kind of data platform engineer persona that we talk about. So, there's engineers who come to mind, like there's like Stephen Bailey at Whatnot and David Wallace at Dutchy, and there's like other folks like that, who aren't famous per se in the data world, but they live this stuff day to day. And they are part of centralized team that serve like a heterogeneous set of stakeholders and technologies. And they're just like figuring out how to make it so that their stakeholders can own their processes end to end and do great engineering work along the way. I think those practitioners like those don't get surfaced enough, because everyone focuses so much on the investors and the founders.
Yep. Amen to that as well. Couldn't, that's one of the better responses I think I've heard on the show. So thank you for that,
Hey,
Nick.
I just came up with it too. There we go.
That's fantastic. Inspiration sometimes comes naturally when it's best. Great. So really just, first, and again, Nick, thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom with us. When I sort of recap, what I take away as the biggest considerations of, the last, 25 minutes together, I think it really comes down to thinking about the interplay between technology and your organizational design. I think you and Dagster have built some pretty good tooling, and a framework, to drive as much data quality, coordinated orchestration, and really a framework to enable data engineers to do their job as best as possible. Yet at the end of the day, if you look at how quickly modern data systems are evolving, even if you have the Dagster and the world's best systems on the other side of the house, on the data side, to build the best possible data foundation, you're still going to have new data fields, migrated data fields, change around how your application works that results in changes the way the data works, that results in changes the way your application consumes the data. And on the other side of the house, this just oftentimes feels like a nuisance. Because it is, but I think really thinking holistically, from A to B across the org, and ask, what are the gaps, on my team that are required to effectively leverage, these investments. I really think in this day of age, given where technology is and limitations, and the maturation cycle is as critical as ever. I'm really excited to see, Nick, where you and sort of Dagster push your product. And I also think, with this, there'll be an actual evolution around how teams organize and orient to this new set of technologies that are emerging.
Totally, yeah. Like our goal here is to make technology that can reshape the org chart, and not just because we aren't want to arbitrarily change the org chart. It's more like we want to fundamentally change the way organizations operate, and kind of like a changing org chart is a measure that you're doing that. I think we see that not only do data platform teams adopt us, but then once people adopt us, they naturally see the value of a data platform team. They're like, oh, we can use this for ML as well. That's very exciting. And in addition to data, just as an example. So we at Dagster love thinking about the cross product of organizational and technical design for sure.
Awesome. And so, Nick, anyone listening to the show who wants to learn more about Dagster, how do they find you?
Yeah, so luckily we have a SEO friendly name for the project. So you can just type in Dagster into Google and we'll pop up. So Dagster.io is kind of our main domain. We also have a GitHub repo. You can go star, and then we have you can also link to our Slack community from there, which is very vibrant and has north of 10,000 people in it, I think, at this point. And then we have our commercial product as well called Dagster Cloud, which has it's like a seamless, effortless way to deploy Dagster. And we have a serverless option, and you can really get started in just a few clicks and start to build with the system. So short answer: go to Dagster.io and start poking around. It's open source software too, so you can just pip. If you're a Python programmer, you can just pip install it, and you're ready to go.
Awesome, Nick. Thank you for that, and thank you to everyone listening to this episode of the Data Unlocked podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Simon Data, please visit us on the web at simondata.com or email us at hello@simondata.